July 10th, and we have to pay close attention to the change that's about to happen with Bitcoin. Up until now, we've been watching the mid-channel support or mid-channel resistance from below. In other words, reaching $64,000 and then dropping back down to the $60,000 area without quite touching it, around $61,500, something like that. And now we're going to see a change that I'll explain to you throughout this video. At the end of the video, I'll also tell you in the July challenge what the easiest way is, if you're just starting out in trading, to make money little by little and consistently. You'll see how it's actually simpler than you might think at first. But anyway, let's start with the analysis. You already know that to figure out Bitcoin's movement, or really any asset, what we do is look for the strategies of the big players. That is, those people or institutions who have millions and millions invested in a specific market, in this case Bitcoin, and move the price however they want. What they do is try to manipulate the indicators and the price movement itself so that retail investors think it's going one way. Then they move it in the opposite direction, where they think it's best for their strategy and to make money. We, by following the clues they always leave in the market through volume, are going to uncover these strategies. And we're going to win like the institutions do, instead of losing like retail investors. All right, with that said, let's take a look at the channel we're currently in, which is formed by the support at $60,000 and the resistance at $69,000 to $68,000. It's a bit closer to $68,000, but these aren't exact lines, they're more like zones. So we already know that when the price gets close to that zone, it's going to react. It's important to mark supports and resistances. That's exactly why, because when the price gets close to that zone, it's going to react. In other words, it's either going to turn around or the big players are going to have to show their hand with volume. In other words, with aggressive volume. They're going to have to make their intentions clear. What are their intentions? In any case, we take note. These are very important clues to understand the strategy of the big players. What we do is look at which phase of Wyckoff we're in, that is accumulation, distribution, markup, or markdown, on a higher time frame. In this case, we set each candle to 1 week to see that Wyckoff phase, and it's clear that we're in an accumulation phase. As long as neither 69,000 nor 60,000 is broken, see, the price keeps swinging up and down. On the 4-hour chart, we zoom in and see exactly the same thing. We're seeing that movement on the 4-hour time frame. This is 60, this is 69. That movement we saw in the long term. I'm shrinking the chart so it's really obvious. And what the price does is we've been seeing. And I've been telling you this in all these videos. You know, I upload videos every day. I'm Mikel Vasquez, and I've been a professional trader for over 15 years. And what I've discovered that works is looking for the strong hands. All right, what they're doing is moving the price, as we've seen every day, from the 69,000 zone to 60, from 60 to 69,000. Over and over again with different tricks, different deceptions, but in the end, from 60 to 69,000. Right now, we're in that middle zone of the channel. This morning, July 10th, we're seeing that it's trying to reach the highest point it's hit in recent days, which is that 64,700, close to 64,700. It tried to break through, but lost a bit of momentum. What I mentioned at the beginning of the video about the paradigm shift is what we were talking about in previous videos. And now, looking ahead to the weekend, you know, we make the forecast for about a week, maybe a little less. Looking ahead to next week, what we're going to see is that the price will settle above 64,000. And the paradigm shift I was referring to is that it won't touch it, the 64,000 from below, but instead it's going to start retesting them from above. In other words, we're going to enter a new phase, as long as, you know, we always set a kind of stop. Loss, unless significant volume appears. I'll show you the volume so you can see how the institutions operate. Unless significant volume appears, pushing the price down again. To catch its breath a little, like we've seen it do in the past few days, to catch a bit of air down to the 61,300 area. This could happen over the weekend or at the start of the week, but we basically believe that it's already dropped enough, has gathered enough momentum, and is now going to try to break through the 64,000 mark in a decisive way. Not like it did these past days, trying to break through 64,000 and then immediately dropping back again. That breath I mentioned, dropping below, even down to 61,700 to catch its breath. Basically, we think it won't need to do that anymore because it's already gained enough momentum and we'll see it in this area in the coming days. Also keep in mind that today is Friday and the weekend is starting. A lot of times what we see over the weekends is that the price just stops. In other words, it goes into a standby or a weak movement that makes the price fluctuate. But by Sunday night, it ends up in the same position where it started on Friday afternoon. That's usually how it goes. You already know that in trading, nothing is 100%, but the general rule is that weekends work like that. Even though it works, the 24/7 Bitcoin market operates in a different way. We could even say that we have two Bitcoin markets. One during the week, which starts Sunday night and goes until Friday afternoon, and another one on the weekend. It works differently, but you can still do scalping, intraday trading. It runs from Friday afternoon until Sunday night. I'm always talking in Spanish time. All right, now we've set the forecast for the next few days. Watch the price around this area I'm showing you on the chart, unless those volume spikes appear. The volume spikes, like I always tell you, a volume spike is when the big players are making their presence known. Thank you. Behind the movement, that's what we're trying to find. We're trying to figure out what's behind the chart. These are spikes on the 4-hour chart, since we're looking at the 4-hour time frame. On maxed, above 1.5 billion, you see? All of these are volume spikes where the big players are involved. Usually, a clear sign on the chart is a volume spike, followed by about 4 or 5 lower candles. Here we're seeing a volume spike, and then we have about 12 candles or so after that. Much lower in volume, they're telling us that there's not much interest in the price movement at this moment. And basically, the price is fluctuating with retail traders' intervention without the big players really having to step in. In other words, they're letting it move pretty much on its own. All right, we've already set this forecast. I also wanted to tell you that if you're interested in scalping or intraday trading in my VIP group on Telegram, thank you. I share 2 trades that I make every day. There's also a discussion group there where you can share your opinions about when you think is the best entry. There are people who really understand the charts, and honestly, it's a very pleasant environment. I'll leave the link in the description. As I was saying, for intraday trading, besides following my signals, what you can do is look for 3 characteristics within the chart that will give you some really great entries. You need to look for when the price reaches a support or resistance. In my course, I show you how to identify them. I'll also leave a link in the description with a very significant discount. Look for supports or resistances on any time frame. Look for Japanese candlestick patterns at that support when the price gets there. For example, a long wick, a doji, or several long wicks on different candles. These are very clear signals. Then the signal, what we could call the trigger for that move, is the entry of the big players. On the 15-minute chart, they're usually volume spikes above 125,000. On the 30-minute chart, it's 250,000 or 300,000. On the 4-hour chart, as you've seen, we've seen 1.5 million, and so on. You have to look for these on your own chart. Which ones are these spikes, though? And those reactions, when all 3 elements happen at the same time, that's the best moment to enter a scalping trade. Or intraday, that's great count. We've also looked at the phase we're in for the long term, 3, 4, or 5 days, which is what interests us most in this type of analysis. And then the conditions for entering scalping or intraday trades. Now let's move on to what I mentioned at the beginning of the video, which is the easiest way to make money in trading. If you're just starting out, this is how I do it in the July challenge. The July challenge. I started on this platform with a $500 account, and what I do is make micro trades every day. Always going with the trend. I don't need the move to be big. For example, if we see a strong trend, let's imagine in this move, we enter here and exit here. We enter here, exit here. It's a very simple way. You can also use the signals I give you on BitTelegram, but I believe that with the instructions I give you in these videos, you can do it yourself. All right, we've already been at it for 9 days. I haven't posted today's yet. Today is July 10th, and I'll show you how I made yesterday's entry, the TP, which stands for Take Profit, that mexc.com sent me. And you can see how the account keeps growing. Plus, MXC gave me a bonus, a $60 bonus. Sometimes MXC does this, and the account right now, as you can see, it's at $183. What I do is give away the excess. That is, when the month ends, right now that would be $183. The excess, I started with $500, it ended up at $300. I'll raffle it off among everyone who signs up at maxt.com and makes their first deposit. I'm Mikel Vasquez. This is Daily Bitcoin Analysis. I really appreciate you watching this video, and as I always say, this is not financial advice. I'm just sharing my experience with you after more than 15 years in professional trading. Stay tuned over the weekend because I'll keep uploading videos. We're going to watch that move, that entry in the middle of the upper channel, which is going to make us a lot of money for intraday trading, scalping, and for the week. See ya.